Alright, we're going to be doing a little bit different episode to what we usually do. This is going to be a bit more of a fast-paced episode on what we have done to Yani's XE with the upgraded suspension, new diff bracketry and everything in between. So, stay tuned to see what we've done from factory to modified suspension and how we went about it. Check it out. Here's the upgraded suspension we're going to be chucking in Yani's XE. So, as you've probably seen in a previous episode, we went 9-1 on the standard suspension. So now we're going to be chucking a coilover upgrade in it. So we've opted for the Gazzard Brothers kit. So that heaps easier than making things from scratch, and it bolts straight in and it gets good results. So in the rear we're going to do a coilover, which will be a replacement of the factory coil spring, and a coilover in the front as well. So these will be your top and bottom mounts for the fronts, and the rears were factory replacements. So besides a couple of bushings and stuff down the bottom that will spin up, which you'll see, we've opted for an AFCO 10-inch spring in the back at our specs after scaling the car and knowing what we need. So what we're going to do is show you slapping them in and then get the car ready to go racing. Come have a look what we've done so far. So we're keeping the factory control arms and everything for now, as it's an unwanted expense that the owner doesn't want to do just yet. But we have upgraded to some bigger Wilwood brakes. I believe these are the 310s. So they fit in majority of the 15-inch wheels, and they are much better than the factory. These aren't factory. These would be off maybe a AU style brake. So it's still a single piston caliper, but the hub style, you can, without getting brake fluid all over myself, we're taking this off and then banging the Wilwood on for that, just a little bit extra braking. And then whilst doing that, we've gone to the Gazzard style front coilovers. These little rings locate the spring, the factory style spring, in the top of the strut tower like that. So what we do is we die grind out the original spot welds. So because the engine bay is already painted, we really didn't want to hurt the paint or anything, so what we did was just die grind around them instead of drilling them out and whatnot, so we don't ruin the engine bay. But we take that out, we take the factory coil spring out, and then we bolt plate in, coilover in, and then we'll have our coilover style front suspension. So once we do all this, we'll reassess the ride height and everything from there, and then adjust the back. We've got a few cool things we're doing in the back, because no one really makes a factory location coilover for that, but I'll show you what we're going to do with that. Let's go check out the other side and I'll show you some of the brakes that we've got going on. But on this side is where the master cylinder is. So we're taking out the booster, which you'll probably see down there. So we've taken out the booster and everything. We're going to be running a boostless Wilwood master cylinder. This is all the lines coming off the master cylinder down into the guard, through the bulkheads, nice and neat, to a proportioning valve. Now this proportioning valve we tend to put on majority of the cars just to get that nice bias between front and back, being able to brake nicely. If it brakes too hard on the back, it doesn't tend to pull up as good as it should, and sometimes you brake too hard on the front, you're going to lock up the front and the brake's going to do nothing, and we're trying to get that right. But we're trying to keep everything neat. Tyson's up to a point where we're just going to be putting the P-clips in and locking these in place and keeping them nice and symmetrical. Just little things that we like to do. Now we're in the engine bay, you'll see the top of the struts here. So these coilovers got the adjuster on the top and the bottom being doubles. And over here we have the Wilwood master cylinder. So this is boosterless, so you won't see a big brake booster here. But this master cylinder has the rod shop adapter off the firewall. So we like to use them because they're nice and simple, they bolt straight on, and you can use the factory foam behind the plate. So it helps that little step in the firewall. You'll see our brake lines go down the side here, bulkheads through the firewall. So we've got our two fronts and the single on the rear, and the lacquer band, we keep that around it because we know we need to take it off and bench bleed it prior to putting it on. We've got everything welded on the limiter bars, so the tubes at the top are welded. We've got our tags down the bottom here on the ball joint all welded up too. Now, something that tends to get forgotten a little bit about this is the travel on the suspension versus the travel on the limiters. The travel on the limiters, obviously, you don't want them bottoming out before the suspension because then you're just going to break stuff. So you don't want them bending, you don't want it going up, and just, yeah, you got to make sure the suspension's bottoming out first. So it's very simple on this setup. This setup, all we do is go up a little bit on the bob stop. So just up to there, to the base of the shock. All right. we have 60 mil. All right, now I've already cut these, but we just put that at full extension and we go from hole to hole and we have 75 mil of clearance. So, and that's with the Heim joint wound all the way in. So if we wanted that wound out, because we have a little bit, just so we have a bit of a room for movement. Now, we know we can bolt that up and it's not going to bottom out before the shock does, so we know we're not going to have any issues there. So make sure if you're fitting these at home or anything like that, that you measure, make sure your clearances are the right measurement. Now that the front end is all in the car, we are going to be machining up a couple of little spacers for the back that look very similar to that. That is for the diff side of the top and lower control arms. Now we're going from a 13mm bolt to a 1/2 inch bolt. The UNF bolt that we more commonly use in the rear end and majority of our bolts is going to be smaller. So we need to machine up a couple of steel bushes to go inside those olefane ones. And then we'll be able to jump on and ripping the diff out and getting the rest done. So I'm going to jump onto this and we'll get to ripping that diff out. All right, here we have the bracketry that we've made up for the back of the XE. So XE and XF all being similar suspension, it'll work across the board. So this is the top hat. It is a two-part deal. This is the top hat. So the top hat will look very similar to the factory one that's already in the car, but this one's much taller and it's got a bit of a taper there. The taper there is so it follows the back seat and doesn't obviously end up cutting anything into the back seat or anything like that too. Because we have a fuel cell in the back, we don't want any holes going into the car. So it'll have the locator on the top for the eye to come up through the shock, and it's in the very similar shape to the top hat that's already in the car. And then we have the bottom plate. So the bottom plate has 2 holes, not 4. So the factory one that you pull out of the car will have 4 holes. But this one, we put it up, the 2 back studs will locate, and then you'll be able to cut the hole for the coilover to go up into the car. And that'll in turn give you a bit more room for the coilover to move back and forth with the sweep of the diff going up and down. So what we end up doing is putting this up in the car, those 2 bolts will locate, we mark it, we cut it out, and then that way we can put the top hat into position like that. And what you'll see is in the wheel tub, we actually cut very close to the front holes that are already in the bottom base plate from factory. But what we end up in turn doing is those bolt holes will be right here. So what we use is we put this in position and locate it, and then we use them to plug weld this in position. So then that becomes a permanent fixture in the boot, and then we'll stitch around the edge to make sure that's permanent, nice and sturdy, because obviously we're putting these cars under a lot of load. So the more power you make, you're trying to drive that tyre into the ground, so we want to make sure that that's not going anywhere. And then this bottom plate obviously just helps the support of the tub and also helps you locate the hole that you need to cut out as well. So a lot of people tend to ask, why do you have the bolts? It's just to make life easier. So you can do it yourself, put it in there, cut the hole and put it all together. So these will be online soon, and then you guys will be able to do your own at home. So what we're going to do now is bolt this in the car, get the shocks all lined up, we'll get the bracketry on the diff for the shock, and then we'll be able to pull it all out, chuck it in the diff jig, and we'll be able to final weld it all together. Jump into it. Alright, so we're under the car now, and we're just going to have a quick look at what we've done to the geometry in the back with the 9-inch. So we've opted to put some lower brackets on it. The reason why we wanted to do that, first time we took it to the track, we were very limited on adjustability. So we had a very minimal window of trying to get our anti-squat values and our bar angles right. So we'll go more into depth later on about that when we're plotting a car and scaling a car later on in some of our tech videos. But for now, I'll show you what we've done with this. We've opted for quite a bit of adjustability on a lower bracket for that lower arm to get it on an up sweep. And we've put the new shock mounts in for the coilovers. So we got that in a factory located position with our top hats you saw earlier. So they bolt in with a minimal cutting around the spring hanger, and then they bolt into place. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull it all apart, and then we're going to put it in the diff jig, we're going to weld it all up and get it ready to put it back in. So let's go check that out. So this 9-inch was previously done before coming to us to change up a couple of bits and pieces. Like I said, it doesn't need to be replaced, just refine a couple of bits and pieces. The top arms within like $1.5 million, so they're not that bad. They work with the geometry where we want the top arm. They do need to be braced due to the power of the car makes, just to be safe. And there was a couple of bits and pieces that were miswelded and things like the breather. Where that location is, we're just going to move it a little bit just to stop grime and everything coming in it, and putting a little filter on the top. Things like the sway bar mounts that were probably just for a previous car that the 9-inch probably even came out of. We've mocked up the shock mounts and we've mocked up the bottom brackets just in the car to see how they worked for us, and just seeing if we needed to modify control arms and everything else. So the next step is we're going to cut them off, we're going to clean the housing. You're going to leave the top arm brackets on. It's not worth cutting them off. They do their job. They're welded on the inside, okay. We might grind it and re-weld it in a couple of bits and pieces, but we're going to be putting a back brace on it as well. So we'll TIG that on and make it all nice. We'll show you a little bit about how we do things on the bench here. You don't need to go buy a $5,000 diff jig or make one or anything like that for little processes like this. Things like where the Watts link is on the back, we're going to be chopping that off and just making it nicer. It's just, I don't want it leaving my shop with it hanging off the back here. So the way it is, 3mm plates, probably not how you want to brace that. So along with showing how we keep it straight, checking it for trueness and everything else, we are going to do an in-depth video on how to build a diff a bit later on. But for now, we'll show you the couple of bits and pieces of how we're going to do this specific diff. And it's going to start by cutting everything off that we don't need, cleaning everything up, getting it ready to weld. We've got spaces here that we're going to put between the bracketry, and that's going to be the width that we need it for the control arms that we're using. And then keeping everything square, how we keep it square on the table, just so you guys can do it home the same way. But at the same time, make sure you're going to get it welded by an accredited welder, someone who has the certificates to do it. Safety first, we don't want anyone getting hurt. And little things about just a nice little template that shows your center out and make sure everything's true and plumb. We are going to cut off all the unnecessary stuff and cut off and clean up the bracketry that we've tacked on for mock-up, and then clean up the diff housing ready to be welded on and put all the bracketry back on. So we'll show you how we do that. As you can see here, you'll see there's a bunch of nicks and cuts, and over time where people have had different bracketry on it, and underneath you'll see looks like there was a leaf hanger here at one point or another, but we've got it smooth, clean back. And just to point out quickly that this car is not a show car or anything like that. It's just, there's nothing wrong with the tubes. They're straight. The axle bearing ends are plumb. So we don't need to go ahead and make assumptions that, oh, that's rah. If it was a show car, we wouldn't be putting it in it. So what we're going to do now is, we don't just jump into the deep end and start welding these up and all that. What we end up doing is warping the housing otherwise, putting heat into different spots. Now we're at this stage where we'll weld these up, but we have to chuck a bar all the way through it, and we've got a diff center here which has some plugs already in it. So these plugs that are in here in the diff center, they hold a bar straight through the middle here. So we'll take the template out, we'll put it in there, get the bar all the way through it, which is going to keep it nice and straight while we clean up all these nicks and scratches and all that stuff. Now, I don't think any of them are going to be detrimental to the strength of the diff, but we don't like that stuff. So we're going to clean it up, make sure it's all nice and clean. So next time we address the diff, if we see anything on the axle tubes or anything, we know that it's happened after we've done something. So we're going to address that now, jump on to putting the bar through, put the plugs in, weld up all the stuff, get all the tubes nice and pretty again, weld up the other breather over here, and probably going to weld up the drain as well on the bottom here. I'm not a massive fan of just banging a thread in the bottom of it. I'd rather have a weld on fitting, and yeah, probably going to weld on a little jack point as well on the bottom. Try and just, yeah, keep off once it's all painted, we don't want it chipping and flaking all the time. So we just put a little ring there so we can put the platform of the jack and then jack it up. All right, jump into that. That is all of the circles all filled up. So we've got a whole bunch either side, and we TIG them, we don't MIG them because we want to keep the cleaning up as minimal as possible. So we've got a whole bunch of different ones there. A couple had a bunch of stuff in it, whether it's rust or grime or grit or whatever. We did wire wheel them and stuff as well. So if it doesn't get everything out of it, we'll have to just go over them again. It might be a little bit porous, but we want to clean them up. Like I said, we're not chasing show car stuff. We just want it to be right. So here's a whole bunch of different ones down here. You'll be able to see little nicks and different ones like that. But there's a couple of odd shapes in there. I don't know what's really happening there. So we'll have to just have a look at that later. But yeah, righto, too easy. All right, now we'll just let that cool down. While we're letting it cool down, we're going to jump onto the plates. So the bottom arms, we're going to bang some doubler plates on here. And then we'll go ahead and get back into cleaning this housing up. All the diff tubes are cleaned up, so we've got them much better, much nicer than they were. Now we're at the stage where the center's out of it, the bar's out of it, just to pretty much put the bracketry on. So what we've got is a couple of things, take that off for a sec, is the center of the diff. So we've got that marked out on this little bit of 1 mil here. And what we've done is, from side to side, we've got our center point. So now we work from our center point out to get our bracketry where it is. So we've measured it in the car, we know how it is in the car and everything and where they need to be. So that's why we've got our little cheat sheet here. Now we measure from the center out. And like I said, this is obviously for people that don't have a diff jig or anything like that. It's just kind of working your way backwards. So now, like I said, what we need to do is we need to get it 90 degrees because off our lower bracketry, we actually measure on this back face, which is 90 degrees to how we want the sweep of that bottom arm. Tighten them up. So we're going to get these 90 degrees with the pumpkin because that's going to give us our pinion reference as well. So sometimes it can be a bit difficult off the front of the pinion or off the diff face for something like this that doesn't actually have any flat spots on it, and you're not going to get in that machine spot by the time the center's put in there. So instead of trying to fight for that, we can use the backside of the brackets as long as it's not too cocked with preload. We'll talk about that all when we start talking about setting up a car and some geometry with arms and whatnot. Diff is back together, back braces are on, mounts are on, squared up, happy days. We've got the solid jig bar in it, the bearing cup ends to keep it nice and central. We've done our measurements. I'm happy with everything. A couple extra little braces in here, just with the length of this bar. I wanted to chuck some extra braces in there, and they look cool. Now, we've got our spacers in here, but this one's loose, that one's not. So we're gonna have to just nip up these, make sure our spacers are nice and tight in there, and then we're gonna be going from one side to the other, and then distributing the heat evenly, and then make sure it stays in the jig till it cools down, and then we'll get it all painted, put it in the car, start playing with some other stuff. Alright, so we got the diff in, bolted our plates up, got our shocks hanging in where they're going to be sitting. So that'll help us when we lift the diff up, we'll be able to sit on the shocks, and then top arm's already in, just helps to balance everything. And jack it up, put the bottom arm in, start figuring out things from there. So reassemble the diff. I just tapped the top of the diff housing and put the breather in it, so I'm going to have to clean all that out, and then we'll be able to reassemble the diff, put it all together, and then start working out pinion angle and everything else that goes with it, where the wheel sits in the tub and everything else. We've come up with a little bit of an issue. The bolt that came out of it, the bolt that's going in it. So that one's just a little bit bent. So, unfortunately, this bolt has bent where the lower control arm, the front of the lower control arm goes in. So we're gonna have to repair it, pretty much. So what we're going to do is, let's go over, look over here. So this bracket off the lower control arm is actually separated off the rail. So we've got to get this back in place. We're probably going to run a weld across the bottom to hold it back in place. But right now, we can't get the bolt to actually go through here, because between where it starts inside the rail and where it gets to here, they're offset. So we'll have to get this back in position and then fix it all up, and then get that lower control arm in. So, unfortunately, these things happen. So you'll see on this side, that lower control arm bracket is nice and flat, just here. And the floor's not dinted up or anything like that. It's just nice and kind of how it should be. So now, on the other side, the floor's all punched up in there, so we're gonna have to bring that down. Hopefully that levels the plate out a little bit, and then we'll have to try and get this in the right spot. This actually makes a lot of sense from why we had to adjust the arm so much to keep it straight. So, oh well, a bit more work to do. We'll get it done. We've got the floor cut up, just trying to address this issue with the lower control arm. So let's just have a quick gander here. So we've open the back seat floor up just to get in here, and we can see it's all bent up in here. So there's a kink through there and it's lifted up. It's actually really hard to see, but what we're going to do now is see if we can address it by pushing that floor back down. See if we can't get it straight that way. We'll probably have to chuck the slide hammer or something on it just to see if we can pull it down. But we'll see how we go with that. If not, worst comes to worst, we'll cut the control arm off, relocate it, fix the floor, and then put it back in. So we got it fixed. After a bit of buggering around, no worries. Floor's all fixed. Under here, there's a few holes up the top. But you gotta do what you gotta do. Alright, so that is it for now on Yani's car. The new front suspension's in, including the coilovers, the brakes, the Mood Motorsport limiter bars, and the rear end's all done with the coilovers and the new bracketry on the diff. So it's all together, we've plotted it out and we've chucked it on the scales, made a couple of adjustments where we had to. Now we're going to be heading back to the track to see if we can better that 9.1. So I have all the faith in the old Girl's Gonna Do It. So on the next episode, we're going to be heading to the track, and we've got a little surprise for you at the end of the episode. So stay tuned and make sure that you go watch the last video, like and subscribe, so you can see where this girl ends up in the next one.